These are some videos of Chinese education, concepts instilled from childhood.
台湾地区在联合国的唯一称谓就是中国台湾省。台湾从来不是一个国家。我热爱中国共产党。
That's really, wow.
Welcome back to Sip&Talk.
Great to be back.
We're diving deep today into, well, a really fascinating topic. It kind of weaves together history, international relations, identity.
And even sports, surprisingly enough.
Exactly. We're exploring Taiwan's path to normalization, from all those complex historical disputes all the way to its ongoing quest for global recognition.
It's definitely an intricate story. But yeah, our goal today is really to help you cut through some of the noise and understand what's genuinely going on.
And a big shout out before we really jump into our longtime listener and friend, Micky. He actually shared some really insightful video content about the Taiwan-China relationship that sparked this whole idea.
Yeah, Micky's insights were fantastic, really helped us frame this. So we're going to break this down into basically two main parts.
Right. We'll try to stick to the facts, from an international perspective objectively so you could form your own understanding.
Exactly. So grab your favorite beverage.
Because we're about to unpack, well, one of the most interesting geopolitical stories out there right now. Okay, let's get into it.
All right.
So for our first big part today, we're sort of tracing Taiwan's journey from that period of intense civil strife all the way to how this really unique identity emerged.
Yeah, we'll look at the historical context, the Civil War that, reshaped China, Taiwan's much deeper history.
That pivotal shift in international recognition, that's huge.
Massive. And then, yeah, the evolution of Taiwan's distinct identity, including that really unique and, honestly, often misunderstood Olympic journey.
Okay, so to really get the present, we have to rewind, way back.
Yeah, you really do. Our starting point is pretty critical, the birth of this divide. Post-war China and that dramatic exodus to Taiwan.
Right. Imagine 2,000 years of imperial rule in China just poof, gone.
Yeah, that happened with the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1912. And in its place, the Republic of China, or ROC, it first emerged. A massive historical turning point.
But it wasn't smooth sailing, right? It brought in a lot of instability.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
What followed was a really tumultuous era. You had widespread armed rebellion, warlords carving up territory.
And that kind of provided the fertile ground, didn't it, for the rise of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP.
Exactly. The CCP started out, largely as an agrarian rebel force, but they were definitely building strength and ideological fervor during that chaotic time.
So here's where the drama really ramps up. After World War II ends in 1945, you'd think, okay, celebration, right?
Nope. Instead, China plunged right back into a massive, really brutal civil war.
And this wasn't totally new, right? It was sort of reigniting old flames.
Precisely. Reigniting hostilities between the ruling nationalist Kuomintang, the KMT, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the burgeoning CCP under Mao Zedong. It was like this deep family feud that just kept escalating for decades, but, on a national scale. Millions of lives affected. It technically started back in 1927, but flared up intensely again after World War II.
And initially, the KMT, Chiang Kai-shek side, they seemed to have the upper hand.
Yeah, on paper, they did. More resources, a bigger army, recognized internationally, huge U.S. support.
What?
But widespread internal issues, rampant corruption was a big one, strategic missteps militarily, and a collapsing economy, hyperinflation.
Yeah.
It all led to this massive loss of public support.
So the people kind of turned against them.
Pretty much. That erosion of trust and, just basic economic stability really weakened their position at a critical moment.
Which leads us to 1949, a huge year.
Absolutely pivotal. In 1949, the CCP, partly fueled by popular support from promises of land reform and ending corruption, they successfully overthrew the KMT government in Nanjing.
A decisive victory for the communists.
Totally decisive. Fundamentally altered China's trajectory.
So this forced the KMT Chiang Kai-shek to retreat.
A dramatic retreat. December 1949, they flee across the Taiwan Strait to the island of Taiwan.
And they didn't go empty-handed, right?
Definitely not. They brought a significant chunk of China's gold reserves. Tons of priceless cultural artifacts from places like the Forbidden City.
Wow.
And roughly 2 million people, soldiers, government officials, civilians. They set up their new capital in Taipei, still calling themselves the Republic of China.
Meanwhile, back on the mainland.
On October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong officially proclaims the establishment of the Communist People's Republic of China, the PRC, in Beijing. So suddenly you have these two governments.
Both claiming to be the one legitimate China.
Exactly. The sole legitimate China.
Which created this, what is it called? The hand-thief incompatibility.
Yeah, that's the term. And it wasn't just like a political disagreement. It was this deeply ingrained belief we cannot exist on the same stage.
Like high school drama, but with countries.
Kind of. Both sides claimed to be the only legitimate government of all of China. Each saw the other as an illegitimate usurper. A total identity crisis on a massive scale. It permeated everything: diplomacy, education, even names.
And in those early years, the ROC in Taiwan, they weren't just settling in, were they? They actually planned to go back.
Oh yeah. For decades, the plan was to retake the mainland. It wasn't just talk, it was core policy. It shaped their military, their politics, the daily lives of people there. They really believed they'd return.
You even had, like, small battles, right? Like shelling across the strait.
Yeah, the 1958 Kinmen artillery battle is a famous example. Regular shell fire exchanged with the mainland. A stark reminder of the ongoing Cold War right there.
And the U.S. initially was backing the KMT.
Right. The U.S. threw its weight behind the KMT, substantial military and financial aid during the Civil War, even as the CCP was gaining ground, picking a team in a very complicated global game.
And that early involvement just set the stage for decades of complex relations.
Absolutely. A relationship that's still incredibly complex today.
Now, okay, it's really important to understand that Taiwan itself has a much deeper history. It wasn't just some empty island the KMT fled to.
Not at all. That's crucial. Before, say, 610 AD, Taiwan was this vibrant mix of Austronesian peoples. Their ancestors settled the island thousands of years earlier.
So indigenous populations with their own cultures.
Exactly. Thriving communities, local rulers, even periods where pirates had significant control. It definitely wasn't Chinese in the way people often assume. Rich, distinct cultural heritage long before any major Chinese presence.
Then the Europeans show up. Age of discovery.
Right. The Portuguese sailed past in the 16th century, name it Formosa, beautiful island. That name stuck for ages.
And then the Dutch and Spanish?
Yeah, 17th century, they established footholds. They're vying for trade routes, resources. The Dutch eventually kicked the Spanish out in 1642, set up plantations, sugar, rice made it a key trading base. So for a while, it was deeply plugged into European colonial networks.
Okay, and then another really significant chapter. Japan.
Hugely significant.
Okay.
After the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895, Taiwan was actually ceded to Japan, handed over.
50 years, that's a long time.
Half a century, 1895 to 1945. So for nearly 5 decades leading up to and including World War II, Taiwan was officially a Japanese colony. This period profoundly shaped its infrastructure, economy, culture, leaves a legacy still felt today.
And that Japanese rule, it involved a lot of development, right?
Yeah.
Infrastructure.
It did. They built extensive railways, modern banking, public health systems, modernized agriculture, irrigation, set up industries for resource extraction.
Though it wasn't exactly benevolent rule.
No, definitely not. Often brutal, exploitative. But that forced modernization, maybe unintentionally, laid a crucial foundation for Taiwan's later economic growth after the war. A complex legacy for sure, but it left tangible improvements.
Okay, so WWII ends, Japan surrenders in 1945, Taiwan is handed over to the ROC.
To the Republic of China, yes, which was then the internationally recognized government of China. But here's a really sticky point, legally speaking, with huge implications today.
Oh, legal sticky points are never simple.
Right. Some legal interpretations argue Taiwan was just considered an occupied territory until the 1952 San Francisco Peace Treaty.
Okay.
And even that treaty only had Japan renounce its claims over Taiwan. It didn't explicitly state who the territory was ceded to.
Wait, so Japan just said, we give up our claim, but not we give it to.
Exactly. That ambiguity around Taiwan's precise legal status, still hotly debated today. It creates this complex foundation for all the current arguments about sovereignty. The fact that the treaty didn't explicitly transfer sovereignty leaves these legal questions lingering.
Which must impact its international standing, right?
Hugely. And that inherent ambiguity, yeah, it really fed into what became a diplomatic tsunami, ultimately leading to Taiwan's international isolation.
So for decades after the KMT retreat, the ROC in Taipei was actually seen as China by the UN.
Paradoxically, yes. For decades. Recognized by the UN, most countries, as the sole legitimate representative of all of China, they held China's powerful seat on the UN Security Council.
It's really hard to imagine that now.
It is. But for a long time, the world officially saw Taipei, not Beijing, as the capital of China.
But obviously that didn't last. The tide turned.
Dramatically. The PRC on the mainland was just growing stronger population, economy, political influence. It became undeniable on the global stage, increasingly difficult for the international community to keep ignoring Beijing's claim to represent China's massive population.
And then came the big moment. 1971, UN Resolution 2758.
That's the one. That's where everything truly changed for Taiwan globally.
Yeah.
The UN General Assembly votes not just to recognize the PRC as the only legitimate representative of China.
But they actually used the word expelled.
They did. The resolution explicitly decided to expel forthwith the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek from the place which they unlawfully occupy. So yeah, the ROC was literally kicked out of the UN.
Wow. That must have been a massive shock.
Monumental blow. Isolated Taiwan almost overnight. Most countries then quickly followed the UN's lead, switched diplomatic ties from Taipei to Beijing, broke off official relations, a rapid sweeping shift in global diplomacy.
Pushing the ROC into this weird diplomatic limbo.
Exactly. A very challenging path of unofficial engagement.
And then, 1979, the U.S. makes the switch too, recognizes the PRC.
A huge moment given the U.S. had been a key ally. But crucially, the U.S. Congress in the same year passed the Taiwan Relations Act, the TRA.
Which is still super important today, right?
Absolutely critical. It wasn't just some minor law. It was a profound statement of U.S. intent.
And what does it do exactly?
It allows the U.S. to maintain robust, unofficial relations with Taiwan. It effectively acknowledges its de facto independence, and importantly, it includes provisions for significant arms sales for Taiwan's defense.
To help them resist coercion.
Precisely. The TRA ensures Taiwan's capacity to defend itself and helps maintain peace and stability in the region. It's still a cornerstone of U.S. policy, this delicate balancing act of engaging Beijing while supporting Taiwan's security.
So fast forward to today, how many countries actually have formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan, the ROC?
It's a tiny number, only around 12 as of 2025, plus the Vatican. It really underscores the immense political and economic pressure from Beijing.
China actively works to isolate them diplomatically.
Constantly. Using its diplomatic leverage, economic incentives, pressure, everything to shrink Taiwan's international space.
But despite that lack of formal recognition...
Remarkably, Taiwan maintains extensive unofficial relationships, really robust trade partnerships worldwide.
Through those representative offices.
Exactly. They function much like embassies or consulates, just without the formal title. These substantive ties, economic, cultural, technological, are absolutely crucial for Taiwan's survival and influence, especially given its vital role in things like semiconductors. It shows its practical importance regardless of formal status.
And this whole international roller coaster must have deeply impacted Taiwan's own sense of identity, right? And its economy.
Oh, profoundly. That shift in international standing went hand in hand with an internal transformation both in identity and economically, which has been, nothing short of a miracle.
Initially, the KMT government was all about retaking the mainland, you said.
Totally consumed by it. Their whole national project, education, military, culture, was focused on eventually governing all of China again. The identity they pushed was very much Chinese, emphasizing shared history with the mainland.
But that faded over time.
It did, as generations passed, as the prospect of retaking the mainland became, just an impossible dream. This profound organic shift started happening. People on the island began feeling less Chinese and more distinctly Taiwanese.
A grassroots thing.
Very much so. A slow but steady movement of self-identification started emerging.
And democracy played a big role.
A huge role. That shift was massively fueled by Taiwan's really remarkable democratic transition. It kicked off with lifting martial law in 1987, after nearly 40 years of KMT authoritarian rule.
Wow, 40 years.
Yeah. Then a series of political reforms, leading up to the first direct presidential election in 1996, a pivotal moment of self-determination.
Solidifying democratic values.
Exactly, and creating this stark, undeniable contrast with the authoritarian system on the mainland.
And the polls show this shift clearly.
Consistently. Over 60–70% of Taiwanese now identify primarily as Taiwanese, not Chinese, not even Republic of China people. That's a massive psychological and cultural shift. It reflects a distinct sense of nationhood built on shared experiences, democratic values, and a unique history separate from the PRC.
Yeah.
It's their own narrative now.
And at the same time, economically, they were booming. The Taiwan economic miracle.
Simultaneously. It was incredible. They cleverly leveraged existing infrastructure from the Japanese-era railways, early industry, attracted a lot of foreign investment, especially from the U.S. and Japan, who saw Taiwan as stable and strategically important during the Cold War.
And they made smart choices about what to focus on.
Very smart. A strategic pivot to high-tech, especially semiconductors and electronics, became a global leader. That period, roughly the 60s through the 90s, saw sustained GDP growth averaging an incredible 9% a year.
9% a year, that's huge.
Truly earns the title Taiwan Economic Miracle. Just astonishing growth year after year.
And when you compare that to what was happening on the mainland under Mao, like the Great Leap Forward?
It's a stark contrast. The Great Leap Forward was disastrous, leading to a massive famine, tens of millions dead. The Cultural Revolution destroyed intellectual capital, disrupted everything. It really highlights the vastly different paths taken after 1949.
Taiwan focused on practical development.
Practical economic development. Land reform boosted agriculture, government programs helped small and medium businesses thrive, created a robust, diverse economy. And today, they produce something like 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips, utterly indispensable to global tech.
Which brings us to how this unique identity plays out on the world stage, especially the Olympics, that whole Chinese Taipei thing.
Right. It's a constant identity crisis played out in sports.
So back in the day, before 1949, the ROC just competed as China.
Yep, representing the whole nation. But after 1949, with the split, it got incredibly complicated. Both the ROC in Taiwan and the PRC in Beijing insisted they were the real China. Neither wanted the other representing China internationally.
Leading to conflicts in the Olympics.
Direct conflicts. Boycotts by the ROC sometimes. Sometimes they were completely excluded as the PRC gained more international recognition and actively lobbied against them. It was a messy, very public reflection of the bigger diplomatic fight.
So how did they land on Chinese Taipei? It sounds like such an awkward compromise.
It is an awkward compromise. After years of intense negotiation back and forth brokered by the International Olympic Committee, they finally reached an agreement in the early 1980s.
Okay.
Taiwan would compete under this politically neutral name, Chinese Taipei, first used at the 1984 Winter Olympics in Sarajevo.
Why that specific name?
It was purely political. It allowed Taiwan to participate without using Republic of China, which the PRC saw as claiming sovereignty over all China, or just Taiwan, which the PRC saw as promoting independence.
So it avoided the names Beijing objected to.
Exactly. It let Taiwan participate in the Olympics and also other international groups like APEC and the WTO under a name that Beijing could grudgingly tolerate.
And that's why they have a special flag and anthem, too.
Precisely. They march under a special Olympic flag, not their national flag. A specific anthem is played, not their national anthem. People often wonder why, but it's all part of this complex balancing act. Participation versus identity under intense political pressure.
You mentioned athletes pushing back sometimes.
Yeah, there have been instances, like an athlete in 1988 wearing the RAC flag on his helmet. A big no-no under the rules. A silent but powerful act of defiance.
Shows that desire to represent their true identity is still strong.
Fiercely strong. Among athletes, among the public, it highlights the emotional weight of these naming games.
And that wild story Micky shared about the athlete C.K. Yang maybe being poisoned by a PRC spy before the '64 Olympics.
Right. What's fascinating there isn't just the cloak and dagger aspect, but how even decades later, people debate if it was real or just, a political narrative spun by the ROC back then to explain why he didn't win gold.
Shows how deep the politics run, even in sports, affecting how we even remember athletic performance.
Totally. It really underlines how intertwined sports, politics, and national narratives are in this whole context. Makes you wonder about the psychological impact of those stories over time.
And more recently, there was that referendum in Taiwan, right, in 2018, about changing the Olympic name to just Taiwan.
Yes, a significant moment. The public got to vote directly on whether to push for using Taiwan at the Olympics.
But they voted against it.
They did, ultimately. It seems they made a pragmatic calculation. The IOC had warned they could be excluded entirely if they changed the name unilaterally. So it came down to a choice. The symbolic name versus the athlete's chance to compete at all.
A harsh reality check? Choose between identity and participation?
A very tough choice, illustrating the constraints they operate under.
Okay, that brings us perfectly to our second big part today. The propaganda machine and Taiwan's resilience.
Right. Here we'll tackle some of China's key propaganda points about Taiwan, offer some factual counterarguments, and look at Taiwan's ongoing challenges and, importantly, its resilience.
You mentioned saying earlier about authoritarian regimes. If it's not factual, you just keep promoting it.
Yeah, it really applies here. That constant repetition can sometimes stand in for truth, especially when you control the information flow. It's a classic tactic.
Like telling a lie, often enough.
Hoping people start to believe it. It's fundamental to information warfare, shaping perception at home and abroad.
And you think this comes from an anxiety about their own legitimacy, the CCP's?
I think that's a big part of it. They weren't elected. Their authority rests heavily on historical narratives, nationalism, and controlling information. The idea of Taiwan as a country, if it really takes hold, could destabilize their entire narrative, not just internationally, but maybe more importantly within mainland China itself. It could undermine their claim to power.
Okay, so let's break down some of Beijing's main slogans. Number 1, Taiwan is not a country. We hear this constantly. What's the goal?
Purely to suppress Taiwan's international space, deny its sovereignty, create the impression it's just a rebellious province. They hope this reduces its legitimacy globally and stops any idea of two Chinas or one China, one Taiwan.
But if you just look at the facts on the ground, practically speaking,
Taiwan has its own independently elected government. It has a military, about 180,000 active personnel, 1.5 million reservists, its own currency, a functioning parliament, a directly elected president, its own passport, which gets you into many countries visa-free, a robust democratic judicial and electoral system.
those sound like the definition of a country.
They are, by pretty much any standard international definition, like the Montevideo Convention criteria, defined territory, permanent population, government, capacity for international relations. These are the hallmarks of a functioning, self-governing state.
Seriously, what more do you need? Seems pretty clear.
It does. And you can look at other examples, Kosovo, Palestine, the Vatican, not full UN members, but widely considered states in many ways. And here's a question to flip back. Was the PRC not a country when it was founded in 1949, but wasn't recognized by most of the world or in the UN?
Good point. Recognition isn't the only factor. Internal reality matters.
Exactly. Self-governance, internal capacity.
Okay, slogan number 2. Taiwan is part of China. This is the big one, right? Stirring up history and national pride.
Precisely. Frame it as sacred territorial integrity. Turn a complex political and historical issue into an emotional nationalistic one. Rally domestic support, influence foreigners.
But the history, as we discussed, is way more nuanced, not always been part of China.
Not even close. Taiwan was incorporated into the Qing dynasty relatively late 17th century and loosely administered. Then, crucially, explicitly ceded to Japan in 1895. 50 years as a Japanese colony.
And the PRC never actually ruled Taiwan?
Never for a single day since the PRC was founded in 1949. When they took power on the mainland, Taiwan was already separate.
So the argument, take it back, doesn't really work if you never had it in the first place.
It's logically flawed. The post-WWII return to China was more a political statement by the Allies, not clearly defined in treaties like the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which just had Japan renounce claims.
Right, without saying who got it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if once belonged to a historical empire is the standard, well, should China reclaim Mongolia, Vietnam, Korea, parts of Russia? All were tributaries or under Chinese influence at some point. It reveals an inconsistency.
Okay, slogan 3. Taiwan will be reunified, which often sounds more like annexed. Sounds inevitable, doesn't it?
That's the goal. Create a sense of unavoidable destiny. Break Taiwan's spirit. Make other countries think intervention is futile. Resignation.
But the Taiwanese people themselves, polls show they overwhelmingly oppose it.
Over 80% consistently oppose unification with China, especially under Beijing's one country, two systems model. That's not a small market. It's a massive, consistent majority, a very clear public will.
You can say it's inevitable, but the people living there have a very different view.
Exactly. Their voice is loud and clear. And if unification requires force, as Beijing constantly threatens...
It's not unification, it's invasion, annexation.
Precisely. And that violates the UN Charter prohibiting force to change borders. Military action would be illegal internationally, destabilize everything, bring massive condemnation and consequences.
And like Micky asked in his video, why is China, this huge country, so obsessed with tiny Taiwan? Why not just let them be? It's a fair question.
It really cuts to the core. What's the real motivation? And the language used. Chinese officials threatening to crush to pieces anyone pursuing independence, talking about destruction.
Hardly the language of peaceful reunion.
Not at all. It's coercive.
Yeah.
It reveals the true nature of their unification goal.
All right, 4th slogan. There's only one China. Sounds definitive. Used to isolate Taiwan diplomatically.
It's a language trap. designed to force a simple binary choice. But there's a crucial difference between Beijing's One China principle and the One China policy that countries like the U.S. follow.
Explain that difference again.
Beijing's principle insists there's only one China. PRC is the sole government, and Taiwan is part of it. The U.S. policy, however, acknowledges Beijing's position on Taiwan, but doesn't necessarily accept or endorse its sovereignty claims over Taiwan.
So the U.S. says, we hear you, but doesn't explicitly agree on the Taiwan part.
Exactly. It's carefully worded diplomatic ambiguity. It allows the U.S. to have formal ties with Beijing while maintaining robust unofficial relations with Taipei.
And those unofficial relations are significant.
Hugely significant. U.S. arms sales, European tech collaboration, strong ties with Japan, Australia, many others. Practical engagement treats Taiwan as distinct and vital, regardless of formal recognition.
So in practice, it functions like there are two entities, similar to historical examples like the Koreas or Germany's.
Pretty much. The idea of a single unified China right now is more ideological and aspirational for Beijing than a reflection of the actual practical reality on the ground and in international relations.
Okay, let's pivot to Taiwan's current challenges and its resilience, starting with that military pressure.
Yeah, China has seriously ramped up military intimidation. Constant large-scale drills around Taiwan, especially after things like Pelosi's visit in 2022.
Sending a message, we're here, we're watching.
Definitely. Near daily crossings of the Taiwan Strait median line by warships, drones, even messing with civil aviation routes to squeeze Taiwan's airspace. Aggressive moves.
And the defense budget difference is huge.
Massive. Taiwan's aiming for around $20 billion USD in 2025. China's projected at $245 billion. More than 12 times larger.
But the U.S. continues support under the TRA.
Critical support.
Yeah.
Arms sales, training, bolstering Taiwan's defense, aiming for deterrence. A vital lifeline.
Another challenge, economic reliance on China.
Big one. China is Taiwan's largest export market. Taiwanese businesses have invested hundreds of billions on the mainland. Creates connection, but also vulnerability to economic coercion.
But Taiwan's trying to diversify, right? Not keep all eggs in one basket.
Absolutely. They're actively pushing their new Southbound policy, diversifying trade and investment towards Southeast Asia, India, the Indo-Pacific.
And companies like TSMC are building plants elsewhere. U.S., Japan.
Exactly. TSMC's huge investments, like the $100 billion plan for Arizona fabs, plus expansion in Japan and Europe that's strategic, reduces over-reliance on China, bolsters global supply chain resilience by spreading out chip production. Very smart move.
We talked about propaganda slogans, but it's more than that, isn't it? This cognitive war.
Much more. It's a sophisticated mix. Economic pressure, state media manipulation, social media disinformation campaigns.
Trying to influence public opinion in Taiwan.
Especially before elections. Using platforms like TikTok, Facebook to spread fake news, sow discord, amplify divisions, undermine trust in democracy, push pro-unification ideas. A constant insidious battle for hearts and minds.
But Taiwan's fighting back.
Very effectively, actually. There's world-leading civic groups and government initiatives countering disinformation. Groups like COFAX, Taiwan Fact Check Center, they debunk false narratives in real time, provide tools for citizens, build digital literacy. Taiwan's become a global model for fighting foreign information manipulation. It shows their democratic strength.
And finally, their efforts for international normalization, getting recognized.
Despite all the hurdles and Beijing's constant blocking, they work tirelessly, trying to gain greater recognition, participate in global bodies like the UN, WHO, ICAO.
Even if they have to use names like Chinese Taipei.
Yeah, they participate where they can APEC, WTO, Olympics under compromised names or as observers. They relentlessly advocate for their right to contribute to global governance, arguing that excluding them harms everyone on issues like health or aviation safety.
It's a tough road, constantly pushing against that pressure.
Incredibly tough.
Yeah.
But their persistence, year after year, shows remarkable determination and a powerful belief in their own sovereignty and right to exist on the world stage.
So, wrapping this all up, what does it mean for you listening? We've gone from Taiwan being seen as official China decades ago.
To a point where, overwhelmingly, Taiwan just doesn't want to be China anymore. A complete historical reversal. A huge shift in identity and aspiration, driven by decades of separate development and democratic experience.
Taiwan's on this really challenging path towards normalization, trying to be recognized as a sovereign nation while facing constant pressure from Beijing.
Yeah, who still see them as just a breakaway province. It's not just political. It's a generational relay, a cultural refining process for Taiwanese people as they define and solidify their unique identity.
And connecting it back to Micky's point in his video, why are some regimes so obsessed with forcing their will on others? Even if it seems like they're driving the wrong way on the highway compared to global norms.
It raises that bigger question, right? Universal values opposing war, human rights, freedom, democracy, they are increasingly accepted globally. If these common understandings keep spreading, maybe those regimes operating differently will eventually have to confront where they stand relative to the rest of the world. It's a powerful thought.
Absolutely. You know, bottom line, no matter who you are, what your history, you just can't use what you think is right to threaten or violate others, no matter how righteous you feel your reasons are.
True peace, true justice, it has to come from mutual respect, adhering to shared international norms.
We really hope this Sip and Talk has given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced view of this incredibly complex, incredibly important situation.
Yeah, it's all about thinking independently, seeking out different perspectives, and forming your own understanding, rather than just accepting one single narrative.
And huge thanks again to our friend Micky for the amazing insights that really sparked this whole conversation. Seriously, go check out his YouTube channel. He's got hilarious memes, music, wine tasting, travel vlogs.
It's a blast. Definitely go check it out.
And please, if you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your podcasts. Don't miss our next discussion.
We'd appreciate that.
Until next time, stay curious.